Coming up on Makosi today.
What I like about Zimbabwe is that one feels there is the potential to contribute.
Would you say there is no more discrimination in Zimbabwe?
The violence, the discrimination is not only on one side.
So you were studying at Cambridge University. Why did you come back? Did you finish your degree?
The potential to contribute.
Okay.
This potential is not
So we're about to meet a living legend, my role model. She is a film writer, very popular film. She's an award-winning author. Don't go away.
In 1993, Tsitsi Dangarembga wrote the short story for the film Neria, which became the highest-grossing film in Zimbabwean history. Born in Zimbabwe back in 1959, she spent most of her childhood in England but later studied between the two countries, doing medicine at the University of Cambridge and psychology at the University of Zimbabwe. Her early writing experience as a copywriter for a marketing agency gave her an avenue for expression. She wrote numerous plays, including The Lost of the Soil. In 1985, Dangarembga published a short story in Sweden called The Letter. In 1987, she published the play She Does Not Weep in Harare. At the age of 25, in 1989, she had her first taste of success with her novel, Nervous Conditions, which won the African Nation of the Commonwealth Writers' Prize. It is considered one of the 12 best African novels ever written. A sequel, The Book of Not, was published in 2006. Tsitsi continued her education later in Berlin at the Deutsche Film and Fernseh Academy, where she studied film direction and produced several film productions, including a documentary for German television. She also made the first Everyone's Child in 1996, the first feature film directed by a black Zimbabwean woman. It was shown worldwide, including the Jameson Dublin International Film Festival. In 2002, Tsitsi Dangarembga founded the International Images Film Festival in response to the proliferation of beauty contests at that time, in order to provide diverse narratives by and about women. In 2011, she orated a TEDx talk at Harare called The Question Posed by My Cat. Today, for the first time on television, Makosi talks to Tsitsi about her many achievements as well as writing the film you all know and love, Neria. You lived in England, Rhodesia and Zimbabwe. Any difference between the three countries?
Oh, a huge difference. England, European, modernized, that was in the 60s. I was very young, so I don't remember a lot. I did go back at the end of the 70s. And again, it's just the amenities. You know, life is so comfortable. You can basically go through the day without any major mishaps. Rhodesia was something else. I lived in a fairly well-off environment, but there were other things that were not so comfortable about Rhodesia. I did experience a lot of apartheid or discrimination, as they called it here. I remember in particular, at one point, a friend of ours, a friend of the family from England, came to visit. And so my father thought we'd take her out and give her a nice tea somewhere. And so we went into this restaurant at Hot Springs, and the manager came in and said, please sir, will you leave? Your guest can stay if you would like to leave her here. She can have her tea, but you cannot. And that was such a heart-rending situation. This was someone that we had so looked forward to receiving and treating well here. And lots of that kind of thing happened. I went to what was called at that time a multiracial school. And there were all sorts of weird things going on there. For example, the black girls were not allowed to use the white bathrooms and this kind of thing. Zimbabwe, well, Zimbabwe exists, which is very good. I think we are a very young country, so I think it is a bit difficult to compare it with England, which is centuries old. Exactly. And when you think that Rhodesia really was an offshoot of England with a centuries old history, I think we really can't make the comparison. I'm hoping that things are going to move forward in a positive manner. I do think what I like about Zimbabwe is that one feels there is the potential to contribute.
Okay.
This potential is not often realized because of things that happen in the country, but we don't see them as immutable. We see them as things we can change ourselves, and even causing that change is a contribution. So for me, that's what makes it special to live in Zimbabwe and be Zimbabwean.
Would you say there's no more discrimination in Zimbabwe?
It depends on what you mean by discrimination. I would say there is a fair amount of racial discrimination. We do understand that when a people like the black people in Zimbabwe have suffered so much, there are feelings of animosity, and these feelings have not really been resolved as far as I am concerned. I think we have had political solutions to issues like discrimination, but we haven't actually had human solutions to them. We tended to sweep everything under the carpet and say we're all one happy nation. If we were enemies yesterday, today we are getting on. And that looks good on paper and on treaties, but in reality,
It's not.
it's not. I remember, for example, around 84, I was hitchhiking into town from Mount Pleasant. I was a student at that time. This truck came by. This load of white guys had a lot of makina, you know, those seeds in the truck.
Yes.
And they just threw them at me. And those were the ones that we used to throw at each other as children because we knew that they really stung.
Exactly.
And so obviously this was meditated. I mean, and there are worse things that have happened. And the violence, the discrimination is not only on one side. We see two groups of people, black and white, who have not really reconciled their differences, who have deep-seated animosity historically. And I think we need to talk a little bit about that if we really intend to get over it. Otherwise, we'll just be throwing stones at each other for decades to come.
So you were studying at Cambridge University. Why did you come back? Did you finish your degree?
I was studying medicine at that time, and I really decided that I didn't want to study medicine anymore. My intention had been to study psychiatry, and then I realized that even psychiatry was not what I wanted to do. It was all based on drugs and pharmacology. It wasn't concerned with understanding the whole person and taking a more holistic approach to healing. And so I decided that I would come back to Zimbabwe, and that's where I started studying psychology. So no, I didn't finish my degree in Cambridge. I came to UZ and studied psychology there, which was fabulous. I really enjoyed it. And then I wanted to do clinical psychology because that was the direction I had wanted to go in even when I went to Cambridge. And the clinical psychology degree was meant to begin in the year that I finished my undergraduate degree, but then it didn't. And so I was at a bit of a loose end, and somebody asked me to work in a production house, so that's actually how I got into film.
Yeah, but you know, sometimes we follow our dreams. That probably was your psychology. And sometimes our dreams follow us. And that's what we're about to talk about. Nervous conditions. What was the driving force behind that?
The driving force behind nervous conditions was in fact vanity, if you like. I wanted to see a girl like myself in literature. I'd been reading for years. I was in my 20s when I wrote it, and I had not encountered a girl like myself in literature. I had discovered one girl called Fanta in a book written by a Francophone writer, but that didn't even seem like me because it was so French.
Exactly.
And so I thought, well, it's up to me. If there's a lack, if there's a gap, I'm going to fill it. And I was also aware of the issues I had encountered growing up, you know, with brothers being favored and this kind of thing, that I felt that it was high time that somebody did something for young girls so that, you know, by the time they're 10, 12, they know that they can go out into that world and do something, that that world is as much theirs as anybody else's.
It was a very successful book. Did you see it being that successful when you were writing it?
Absolutely not. I don't think of myself as a professional writer as such because I'm not disciplined. I write out of passion. Yeah, I have to really enthuse myself about something and then it just comes out, and it seems like I actually have to offload what I have to say. So I thought, well, I've done this thing and I've been sincere about it. I've put my heart into it. I hope someone will enjoy it. And then in the beginning, nobody did enjoy it because the publishing houses here in Zimbabwe did not accept it. So I sent it to the women's press in England. This was at the end of the 80s or the middle of the 80s. And there were lots of women's publishing houses in the world at that time. And they didn't get back to me either. Then towards the end of the 80s, I had to go to London on business. So I thought, well, I'm here. I'll just pop in and see whether they've read it. And they hadn't read it, so they asked me when I'd sent it. It was about 4 years ago at that time. And they said, well, look, we'll go down to the cellar and see if we can find it. So I stood there for about 10 minutes and somebody came up with this dusty envelope, khaki envelope, that I remembered posting 4 years ago and said, is this it? So I said, yes, this is it. And they said to me, well, since you're here, we are going to read it now. And before the day was out, I had a phone call saying, oh, we love it, we want to publish it.
Coming up after the break.
And then you wrote Neria. What inspired that?
I'm just glad that when I create these characters, they speak to people.
And then you wrote Neria.
Yes.
Very successful movie. What inspired that?
Neria was a commission from Media for Development Trust, and they were a production house in Zimbabwe at the end of the 80s. And because I had become known as a writer, they asked me to write the story for Neria. It was a lovely story. I think it was a personal story. One of the producers' mothers had actually been through a similar situation.
Right.
But they went out and they did a whole lot of research with other women, widows, who had had trouble accessing their basically their property after their husband passed away. And I had to go through all that research and put all the bits and pieces together and then distill all that research into believable characters. And so it was something that I was also very much able to put my heart into. And yeah, I'm just glad that when I create these characters and tell these stories, that they speak to people and say things to people that are useful. Enjoying a story is one thing, but then being touched by it so that you feel that something is moving inside you and maybe growing positively inside you. Yeah, that's another
I know
thing.
I cry easily, but Neria made me cry the first time I watched. I was really young, but I remember I cried and everybody around me was like, why are you crying? But can I just ask you, what is being done in Zimbabwe to protect our widows? Because you still have those scenarios where somebody loses their husband and the husband's brothers want to come in and take everything. How are widows being protected?
Well, the law is on the side of the widows.
Right.
Widows' property is protected by law. But then we have to ask ourselves the question, how far the law is actually effective on
Right.
the ground. And I think our society is so patriarchal that actually that law is not as effective on the ground as it should be. You know, there are people who you would imagine would certainly write a will, and they don't write wills, and you will find that the widow finds herself in very difficult situations. Another issue that I have discovered that is happening in Zimbabwe is partly that the way women themselves are socialized is to blame, because you will have a woman who has sons. Her husband passes away. She puts all the management of the estate into her son's hands, and the son just robs her blind.
Exactly.
It is such a common story. I was shocked, and until that happened to somebody close to me, I didn't know that this kind of thing was so widespread. And so you have people who are trying to help widows in that situation. They're going around and they're telling women to make sure that they register the estate in their own name, not to let their
Sons take over.
Absolutely, it's just now being transferred into the family. But this idea of men sympathizing with each other is also difficult. You find it in lots of areas. For example, in rape cases, a policeman, or in cases of domestic violence, a policeman would not be as hard on a male offender as maybe he ought to be. And so you have the same kind of thing happening also. People will make excuses and say, oh, probably they're fighting, there was a family feud, so it must be all right that the son is behaving in this way. So it is a huge issue. I think one way to tackle it is to speak to the traditional leaders.
Right.
And to really take it very slowly with them, to speak very respectfully, to understand where people are coming from when they say that male people should inherit, but then to show that the world has changed.
Under that answer, would you say, are men not equally as vulnerable as women to issues like rape, domestic violence, and so forth?
I think certain men do become survivors of rape and domestic violence, but I would not say that they are equally vulnerable, because rape, domestic violence is a question of physical strength often.
Right.
And so we are constructed generally in such a way that the male is stronger. So that physical risk is much less than it is with a woman. You will have some women who are very strong. You will have some men who are simply not violent people and who will not hit back if a woman starts beating him. And of course, those people also need to be supported, because in my opinion, they are behaving in the right manner. You know, in our past, when it was about going out and killing the lions and bringing in the meat, it was useful for men to be very aggressive and bloodthirsty.
Right.
But we live a completely different life now, so that kind of behavior is not useful at all. So people have to understand that we have to change our way of thinking. We have to change our way of being if we want to be successful in the environment that we have in 2014.
Awesome.
Coming up after the break.
I'm Tsitsi Dangarembga. You're watching Makosi today. We're talking books, films, and women. Don't go away.
So tell me a little bit about Zimbabwe's film industry. Do we have as much potential as, say, Nollywood?
I think Zimbabwe's film industry has huge potential. I think Zimbabweans are extremely creative people. We are extremely talented artistically. I've been working with young people here for nearly 2 decades now, and the amount of talent in all areas of the arts is amazing. And this is really important for film because you have to have talented writers, you have to have talented actors, you have to have talented design people and so on. We need all of the people. And I really think that Zimbabwe is one of the countries that has huge talent in that respect. What we do not have really is policy.
Right.
That is going to sustain and foster a film industry. Okay. So I think we have to look at our internal problems, and I think we might need to mature a little bit. I do think that the impetus has to come from government. People often say that we need the private sector to come in, etc. But it is the state that has got to set the foundation for any kind of industry. So we need to remember that. So I think that the filmmakers have to engage. Now, looking at Nollywood, Nollywood has nearly 250 million people. And that is a huge market for films. It would be difficult not to be successful.
True.
If you have a market of 250 million. So when we look at the numbers, Zimbabwe is going to have to look at other strategies. But in terms of product, we can be up there and competitive. In fact, I believe we could do much better.
Awesome. I know you're a very busy woman because we tried to get you. So how do you juggle between being this successful writer, mother, wife, and everything? How do you balance all of this?
You know, I actually don't balance it. I just do what I need to do and try to be nice to people, including my husband and my children, and it kind of works. So I work with my husband. He's an editor and he does production management and he runs the office when I'm not there.
Okay.
And so it's just worked. I do think it's a blessing. My children are all very artistic, so they understand what I'm doing, and it's just really been wonderful that it happened so well for me.
How long have you been married for?
Oh my goodness. Oh yeah, this will be our 20th anniversary this year.
Oh, wow, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
What do you think of interracial marriages, especially in Africa?
In marriages of people with different races, the family can sometimes be a little bit problematic.
Yes.
And I know that Zimbabweans come from a British and English background. So maybe they would not have looked very favorably on people of German descent. My husband is German.
Okay.
But one can get round everything. Yeah, and I was very fortunate in that my German family also were not fazed by the fact that I am black and I come from Zimbabwe.
Right.
So as I say, I have been extremely blessed.
So you started off at Cambridge. You wanted to be a psychiatrist, right?
Yes.
And you ended up writing bestsellers and you ended up writing, very inspirational movies. Now, when I look at your story, I can identify to it because before I went into this, I had to go to university and do what my parents wanted me to do. Now, just briefly into the camera, I would like you to say something to the African girl child who feels a fire within them that wants to write, but because society is saying become a lawyer, they just endure at law school. So just inspire someone and encourage someone because you are such a role model.
Thank you. My dear young women, I know that you have a fire inside of you. Each of you has a fire and a passion for something. Follow your passion in a way that lets you do what is important for you. Do remember that it's important to live with other people. So where you can make other people comfortable, do so. But when you realize that this is now about either me or them, please do choose yourself. It's most important that you choose yourself.
Wow, that just gave me goosebumps. Where it's a matter of it's either them or you choose yourself. Tsitsi Dangarembga, thank you so much for coming on the coast today.
I'm sure you really enjoyed that interaction. I really loved what she said, especially when she said it's important to be good to people. But when it comes to a point where you have to choose between them and yourself, always choose you. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other.